very much, Craig. I was just asking my friend Lorraine where you got all of that from. Certainly not from me, and I'm quite embarrassed that issues of cobbler is coming up. Now I'm ashamed of my past. Mr. Chairman, members of the bench of Melbourne, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I take this opportunity to greet you in my local language to say, Kushe, howdy body, which means, hi, how are you today? It's indeed a great pleasure to be here today to talk to you, and I think I must particularly thank the Criminal Bar Association for organizing all of these, and to the Travel Club. But I want to be particularly thankful to Sally, who has been very patient with not only me, but also the immigration system. We spent almost a year and a half trying to get a visa to come here. It's interesting that I'm going to mention this. I have traveled quite extensively, so because I get problems with visas, I have packaged all my 4 passports to show that I have traveled. But every time I send my passports to an Australian embassy in Ghana, it's sent back to me, so you don't have proof of this. And I write back to Sally, I don't have proof of this. I sent it to South Africa, they say you have to go to Nairobi. So it took us a year and a half. While I do understand the need for self-preservation in this era of threat, I thought it was quite frustrating. And at some point, I thought Sally had said, oh, we're going to call off this trip. And I was quite worried until, interestingly, the visa came when we expected it very least. The visa came in with this condition. You have a 1-month visa, but you must be in Australia by the 31st of July. And then nothing had been arranged, I guess, so we had to rush and try to get it event. But particularly, I'm thankful to you, Sally, and I thank you for organizing all of this. In late 2010, I got this email from, I know the first name, which is common, Ashley, and it was very difficult to pronounce the surname, Harford. That I want to come and volunteer with you. And I said, good, we need volunteers. But when I went through the CV, this is a lawyer of 20 years experience. And I was like, wow, how will I come and monitor or supervise a 20-year experienced lawyer when I'm just 6 years in this profession? I wrote him back, and eventually we got Ashley. Ashley came to Sierra Leone on Christmas Day. So we had very little time to sit and talk. But I think I have to be very grateful to Ashley, because he went to Sierra Leone, he absorbed what he met in Sierra Leone, and he came back, he wrote this book, Man Live by Man. You know, it's a way people survive in Sierra Leone. They say man live by man. So there are few people working, and the few who work provide support for those who are not working. And I'm sure if you read this book, Ashley has in detail described how he was sometimes harassed by beggars for man to live by man. But Ashley is a great fellow. What was amiss when he got to Sierra Leone was the fact that I was unable to sit down and introduce Sierra Leone to him. Because for me, I think it's very important to always go into the history of Sierra Leone, even though a lot of people will read about Sierra Leone. But I would always want to have sat down with Ashley and explain to him that Sierra Leone was once a British colony, and it was founded in 1787 by British philanthropists who had found problems with black people who had fought alongside British soldiers on the American War of Independence. And that at this point in time, they became social menace in London, and they were creating all types of problems. And eventually, the philanthropists like George Wilberforce and Clarkson came together and decided to send them to Sierra Leone. The first group of free slaves, I think this is a commonality that we have with Australia, quite different. For us, it was free slaves. I think for you, it was people who were banished. The first group of free slaves arrived, and they were called the Black Poor. Black Poor, so very poor guys, and they arrived in Sierra Leone. Then Sierra Leone became a British Crown colony in 1808, when the British formally declared protectorate over the capital city, which is called Freetown. So it is Freetown because this is where free slaves settled. It went through a lot of turbulence. Over the years, it was quite necessary for Sierra Leone to gain independence. I didn't get time to explain this to Ashley, but a few Sierra Leoneans came together and said, we need independence. Whether Sierra Leone was ready to gain independence or not, but it was an Pan-Africanist struggle that was going through Africa. Ghana and Liberia were independent, and Sierra Leoneans thought it was time to gain independence. So in 1961, Sierra Leone eventually gained independence from Britain, and we stopped having our legislations made in London. But one of the things that I want to talk about is the fact that in 1930, before independence, diamonds were discovered in Sierra Leone. And as it turned out to be later on, this was the curse for a nation that it has still not recovered from. Diamond was discovered in Connaught, which is the eastern province town, and the British government was practically just interested in getting the raw materials. So what they did was to create a very complex indirect rule system like they did in Nigeria, get the chiefs to govern their people, even at the expense of human rights violations. All what they needed was the loyalty of the chiefs. Give us diamonds, be loyal to us, and we will let you govern your people without our interference. What we needed was diamonds. This was the first time that diamonds and politics became intricately linked. And later on, we realized that this became a major problem. But eventually, when the Sierra Leonean so-called burgeoning elite took over power, it wasn't all about this aspiration of emancipation of Africa, emancipation of Sierra Leoneans. It was just a copycat of what would be how the British administration had governed Sierra Leone, enrich themselves, live in riches, and suppress the people. So between 1961 to 1971, Sierra Leone was seen as a very relatively peaceful country, democracy developing. The democracy was modeled on the Westminster type of parliamentary democracy. And in the course of this, the University of Sierra Leone, called Frobe College, had been established, which was an envy of the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. It was the first university, in fact, that Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown, was dubbed the Athens of West Africa. Students from Nigeria, Ghana, and Liberia would go to Sierra Leone. How such a promising country collapsed became, it's what I call the perplexing paradox. Rich in natural resources, diamond, gold, bauxite, cash crop. It's laid out on the Atlantic Ocean on the west, so therefore seafood you get raw fish in Sierra Leone as you get bubblegum on the streets of anywhere in the west. You know, it doesn't have to go through any process. You will just get seafood in Sierra Leone. So how will the elite sit down and watch this country collapse, become a failed state, to the point that even the civilians were crying for war? It's a question that has not been answered in many instances, but I hope the Truth and Reconciliation Commission did service to that in detail. It was an issue of declining Sierra Leone in a one-party dictatorship, because in 1971, when Sierra Leone became a republic, the executive president, Sheikh Stephen, decided that it was time to take a lot of powers upon himself. So he creates the nomad demigod, nomad great president, big man. He took all the powers. He killed the legislature by introducing the absenteeism bill, which is, if as an MP, if you're absent for 31 days, you'll be disqualified from being an MP. So immediately after elections, he arrested most of the opposition MPs and detained them for 45 days. So they were asked out of parliament. And he also brutally suppressed the media, arresting journalists and detaining them. Then he came to the judiciary. Most of the judges who were judges at that point in time had passed the age of 55. So he got a Republican constitution that brought the age to 55. Any judge above 55, you are either a judge on my whims or caprices, or you leave. So this is the way the judiciary was brought to submission. Judgments were delivered on the basis of the president's command on who knew a politician. It was no longer about reasoning or law. And eventually, interestingly, the judicial system became a political tool. In 1973, one of the ways in which they completely killed the judiciary was to stop the law reporting scheme. So from 1973 to date, Sierra Leone has no law reporting. This was because practically they wanted nobody to scrutinize the decisions of the judges, and nobody was reporting them. So judges became emperor in their courts. They decide what was wrong and right, and nobody will look at the judgment. It wasn't based on reasoned judgment. And so the system imploded to the point that in 1977, a student in the university decided that it was time to call it a halt. There was a huge demonstration in Sierra Leone in 1977. And again, Shepherd Stephen used the police and the military to brutally suppress the student. So it was practically time for a revolution. Everybody was talking about revolution. And fortunately and unfortunately, Muammar Gaddafi of Libya was then trying to spread his Green Book revolution in Africa and looking for disgruntled young student. And he recruited people and took them to Benghazi in Libya and trained them. What was lacking, why there was a huge need for Sierra Leone to get the revolution, for liberation movement, what was thus lacking was an experienced leadership in the rebel movement. These are young guys who had finished university, who were disgruntled with the system. Some of them had been asked out of universities, and then they eventually got to get these opportunities to become leaders of revolutionary movement with guns. They abused the process, classically. But also, there emerged the Revolutionary United Front, the RUF leader, Fodi Sanko, who was a corporal. He was an aged man, very older than the student, and he was a former soldier who was once accused of attempting coup and released, so he was also disgruntled. He took leadership. This is a half-baked corporal who was a photographer in the military, and he took leadership of the Revolutionary United Front. What obtained during the war was unthinkable. I'm sure many of you have read about it. I have made it the point of duty not to talk about the horrendousness of the conflict in Sierra Leone, because for me, I think it's time to move away from the title of Blood Diamond and Child Soldiers to Sierra Leone recovering very well. But when I talk about horrendous war, I'm talking about a war where people's arms were chopped off, people's legs were brutally chopped off, babies were raped as young as 3 years. Pregnant women have their stomach disemboweled by rebels dicing on the sex of the baby in their stomach. And this is where international justice came in. I'm supposed to be talking about international justice, transitional justice, and trauma. At that point, I think the world saw a lot of brutality. And the United Nations, the African Union said, we will not sit by and allow this country to be inflamed. But one thing that is also significant to note at this point in time, the war was a spillover, because Gaddafi's strategy was to start with Liberia, where Charles Taylor was ready to fight, and then use some of the soldiers to support the Sierra Leone revolution. So the spillover of the revolution became very brutal, and the war came in and said, let there be an end to it. This is this kind of situation, this is the post-conflict situation to which Ashley Alfred came to help us to work in Sierra Leone. And I work for the Society for Democratic Initiatives. What we have done, we have tailored our programs on what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report has said should be done for Sierra Leone. Now, in Sierra Leone's transition, like many other countries in transition, there was a need for mechanisms to be put in place, to be set up, that will address the legacies of authoritarianism and military regime. And so the transitional justice mechanism of either having a restorative justice mechanism or a retributive justice mechanism were discussed at length after the Lomé Peace Accord in 1999. In the Lomé Peace Accord, it was clearly listed that there was a need to set up a truth commission. And also a blanket amnesty was given to all of the fighting factions. It was an incentive to get the rebels to stop fighting. And it was a very important incentive. So for them, they were happy. But at that point in time, the United Nations said, no, we are not part of blanket amnesty. We will support the Truth Commission in the accord, we support the entire accord, but the clause of blanket amnesty is not part of the United Nations. So as the conflict subsided and this reintegration took place, the Truth Commission was set up. The mandate of the Truth Commission was to record historical details of the antecedent of the war, to ensure that victims were heard and perpetrators were brought to listen to victims and apologize so that reconciliation would occur. The Truth Commission went into detail recording from 1961 to 1991 when the war ended, what went wrong. And a lot of victims, I quite recall one of the symbols of the Truth Commission was this man who was the first victim of amputee, whose 2 limbs were chopped off. He sat on the stage and with this young boy, and the young boy said, "I'm sorry I chopped off your arm." And the man said, "Well, I don't know whether you did. You were very small when you did it." And both of them embraced each other and they moved on. So the Truth Commission was one transitional justice mechanism. What is important to note is that unlike South Africa, Sierra Leone's Truth Commission did not give amnesty. So the only mandate of the court was get perpetrators, come and testify before the Truth Commission so we can record in detail what actually went wrong and we ask for forgiveness. That was done, and the Truth Commission came out with a 3-volume report in which they listed in detail what went wrong in a very neutral and impartial manner. How the system imploded and exploded, how presidents abused powers. And at that point, they made recommendations, immediate recommendations, long-term, and things to consider. So for us at the Society for Democratic Initiative, it's a matter of looking at the TRC report and say, one of the things the TRC said is that corruption was the main cause of Sierra Leone conflict. All the other issues were just tools that were used to ensure that the leadership of Sierra Leone became very corrupt. And so we started working on corruption, and we drafted the Freedom of Information Bill, like Craig mentioned. However, we've been campaigning for years for that to be passed, and I am not too optimistic it will be passed in the next few years. What I want to dwell on a little bit is the special court. Because for me, I think the special court of Sierra Leone epitomized a shift in opinion that international justice is no justice, that international law is no law. The special court was established on the pretext that it was the Sierra Leone government who asked the United Nations to set it up. It wasn't really, it was the United Nations who came in and negotiated and told the Sierra Leone government that write us a letter asking us to set up a tribunal to try those who bear the greatest responsibility. And in the process, the Sierra Leone government obliged, because this was a time that anything that came from the international community was accepted in Sierra Leone. And it was good that they accepted and wrote to the United Nations. When the special court was set up, the mandate of the court was not to try everybody. In a bid to learn from the International Tribunal for Rwanda and Yugoslavia, I think, the mandate was to try those who bear the greatest responsibility. So it's not about the foot soldiers or the mid-ranking officers who were actually perpetrating the harm, it's about the commanders. And interestingly, the special court charged and tried almost every leader from all the factions, including the pro-government forces that fought to protect democracy. This itself has its implications, because during the Sierra Leone crisis, the military had sold out its constitutional responsibility, and what it did eventually was to team up with the rebels to fight against civilians. In the course of that, few people had come together and formed vigilante groups and called themselves the Civil Defense Forces. In normal circumstances, these guys were heroes. They were heroes because they were defending civilians, they were defending their villages. And I remember one of the dissenting opinion by a Sierra Leonean judge, Bankole Thompson, he said, you cannot find the leaders of the CDF guilty for war crimes because the purpose of their attack was not targeted at civilians. It was to repel rebels and defend democracy. That was his theory. But for the sake of stamping out impunity, all of the leaders of these factions were brought to book, and they've been jailed, and they're now in jail in a neighboring country. And interestingly, like Craig mentioned, Mr. Charles Taylor has also been tried before the special court. Mr. Taylor is not a Sierra Leonean. He was a sitting head of state when the indictment was unraveled in Ghana. And I think this sent a strong message to African leaders that there is equality before the law, particularly international law, that you cannot go on killing your people, and you cannot go on perpetrating harm because you think you're a freedom fighter and get away with it. And it sends a strong message to African leaders that never again will the world sit and allow you to do your normal stuff. I do recognize that in setting up the special court, there were a lot of challenges. And some of those challenges, I would just want to share my opinion with you. I think the special court has done a marvelous job to create things. But I hope in the future that the special court will learn from, or other tribunals will learn from the challenges that were faced by the special court. One of those challenges is the issue of equality of harm. I'm a Sierra Leonean. I wanted to see anybody who had perpetrated atrocities brought to book, but I think it should be done in the right manner, and I think the due process must be followed. The Office of the Prosecution was created, and the Office of the Defense was created, and the Principal Defender's Office. And I think it was the first time at an international tribunal that the Office of the Principal Defender was created. But I think the Principal Defender's Office was understaffed compared to the Office of the Prosecution. And when I worked in the Defense Office, it was a huge problem in getting investigators, in getting people come and really do work. And I think there should be the issue of equality of harm. Another challenge with the special courts faced was the fact that it was based in Sierra Leone. That's a huge opportunity for Sierra Leoneans to see the trial going on and see people who committed atrocities, but it was also an issue. For most of us who worked in the Defense Office, it was a huge risk in a society that has been brutalized and trauma. I mean, a lot of Sierra Leonean lawyers initially were shying away from working in the Defense Office. You know, and also there was a huge uncertainty about finances. Because Kofi Annan, the then Secretary General, realized that the UN process would slow things down, he did not peg the funding of the special court on the United Nations. They created a special fund, and it was reliant on voluntary funding from developed countries who could pledge and support the court. There's a huge inconsistency between pledges and what was really given, which led to uncertainty on the lifespan of the court. So when the court was employing people, they wouldn't employ people for a long time. They would employ people on a need basis. So you have to come in like 2-3 months when you're needed, not like 6 months to really sit down and plan your work. But I think on a whole, Sierra Leone transition has been a great story. It has been a very good success. The special court was a marvelous success. It has brought to book a lot of people. It's winding up. The structures are still based in Sierra Leone. What is important to note also is the fact that it's a very difficult thing to have a restorative justice mechanism and a retributive justice mechanism going on. In Sierra Leone, this problem was faced a lot. The special court was supposed, the Truth Commission was supposed to have people voluntarily come and explain their story so that the records will be taken down. But there was no amnesty. So what if you go to the Truth Commission and implicate yourself? Will you be indicted by the special court? At some point, it was agreed that if you testified before the Truth Commission, you cannot be brought to testify in the special court. And when the Civil Defense Forces, the volunteer group which I spoke about, their leader was arrested by the special court, he was not allowed to testify before the Truth Commission. And this is one of the leaders whose point of view, whose side of the story was needed to complete the records of the Truth Commission. And so if I am advising the international community, I would say don't set both institutions together. You can get a restorative justice mechanism, start it, work and complete, then you get a retributive justice mechanism. Like I said earlier, Sierra Leone is a great and a successful story of transition. There are post-conflict trauma everywhere. You walked on the street, if you read Ashley's book, if you walk on the street, you see amputees begging. And so it is a task for Sierra Leoneans, for me, to ensure that governance is held to account, that what the politicians and the multinational corporations are doing are exposed. These are the challenges that we face at the Society for Democratic Initiative. We try to expose government, we try to bring government to discuss issues, and we try to defend the poor people, particularly victims of sexual and gender-based violence. And after Ashley left Sierra Leone, he sold a couple of his books, and we just set up the George Hypham Scholarship Scheme that sent 42 children to school with $8,000. And so that's a great initiative, and Ashley, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Without taking much of your time, I've exceeded my 20 minutes, but I think what I would want to say is Sierra Leone is making tremendous efforts. Sierra Leoneans want to move on, and they are moving on. After the war, there have been 2 elections. There's going to be a 3rd election in November. And I think it is important for us to talk about those successes. It's important for us to make reference to our past. It's important for us to learn from history and move a country that is so endowed and rich in natural resources and ensure that it doesn't relapse or the antecedents of the war do not occur again. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening.
Emmanuel, you're happy to take some questions? Well, please, do we have any questions? No? Thank you very much. Anyone? Pat?
I'm interested, Emmanuel, in hearing a bit more on how you think restorative justice mechanism like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and subsequent prosecutions and retributive mechanism can ideally be combined. It sounds from what you say like you think there's a role for both, but obviously they're quite different. I'm interested to hear more on views on that.
Yeah, I think after every conflict or after every authoritarian regime, there's a need to actually look into what went wrong. But you can only have sincere discussions and confessions when you don't have prosecution hanging on your shoulder. I think for Sierra Leone, it was lucky. We've been very lucky to have them play, but at the same time, I just thought the timing will have been a little bit spaced. I think you need to get a restorative justice mechanism that will talk about reparation, look into victims' need, because it's very important to get, I mean, one of the things that the Truth Commission will do, restorative justice, is that it will give voice to the voiceless. They will come on the main podium and explain their stories. That is not what a retributive justice mechanism will do. I mean, it's just about perpetrating, about trying those who perpetrated violence or mayhem. So it's always important for societies to heal, for you to have a restorative justice mechanism. I'll give you instances. When the leader of the Civil Defense Force was arrested, it took months of negotiations with his fighters, with his top cadres, not to take up arms. It was almost like they were going to take up arms again, because they were just fresh from war, it was raw, and they were quite ready to go and fight for their leader. That was because of the timing. When Mr. Charles Taylor was arrested, he was detained for a short while in Sierra Leone. The intelligence report from the US Embassy was that his fighters were trickling into Freetown to free him. And there was a huge tension for instability in the region, you know, at that point in time. And that was why he was quickly moved to the Netherlands. So there's always a role for both of them. We cannot give amnesty to people who commit atrocities. I mean, it's also against international law. But one of the things we can do for sure is that we can give timing as to when you bring them to book.
I've got a question for you. Emmanuel, you have described that with this stopping of law reporting, there was no law reports, that judges became emperors in their own courts. We've not had experience of that here. But what sort of, just in day-to-day justice, what sort of infrastructure are your judges working with? What resources do they have and don't have? What resources do your lawyers have and don't have?
Thank you very much. One of the things that I've been talking to Ashley and the Criminal Bar Association is, is how do we get Sierra Leonean judges to come to Melbourne or Australia and understudy how the Australian judges really operate, how they set their calendar and their schedules. I have been to court with Ashley a couple of times, and I see complete disparity in practice. Now, these are judges who do not have research clerks. They don't have internet. If they have, it's their private internet home. So they write judgments that, like I said today, I cannot really give that to my daughter to read, because those judgments are just basically judgments that are not supported by law. They are just supported by opinions, because they can only access books that have been used in England in the 60s. And that's the rule of law that obtains in Sierra Leone. There are no law reporting schemes. So it's quite a difficult situation under which they work. We put a lot of pressure on them. We criticize them a lot. Some of us are quite notorious for criticizing the judges in Sierra Leone. Yeah. A couple of days ago, there was a judgment from a Commonwealth judge on corruption. And I read the judgment and I realized that in his reasoning, he had said the fifth accused was not guilty of anything. But in the summary, he said, I convict first, second, third, fourth, and fifth accused, and their bail is revoked and they were sent to prison. So I called my colleagues and said, did you see this? The Sierra Leonean lawyer, who is my friend who was representing the fifth accused, had not seen the judgment. So he didn't pick that up. I had to read the judgment because I have contact in the judiciary and I easily get them scanned and sent to me here. And then the next day, Lorraine, you've seen the articles, the newspapers are carrying all of this heroic article about me picking up that issue because an innocent man was sent to jail. But this is because if you had a proofreader, he was going to say, I mean, you've said this man is not guilty, why are you summing it up? It's a quite difficult terrain. So I said, is there a way to bring the judges? Is there a way to get books from Australia shipped to Sierra Leone so we can create a library? Is there a way to get exchange programs so lawyers can learn new things from Sierra Leone? The justice system, a lot of money has been put into the justice system by the British government. But I think they focus more on infrastructure, building new buildings, etc., rather than really issues of integrity or trying to empower the judges. So I think there is a huge need if we want to move on, because the Truth Commission listed that one of the perpetrators of violation of human rights before the war are lawyers. The lawyers who would collude with their clients and get money to bribe judges. And that the judiciary is as culpable as the RUF that fought against the Sierra Leonean people. And I think it's key for all of us who are working in Sierra Leone on justice issue to really, really try as much as possible to help the judiciary in one way or another.
Peter.
Sierra Leone got independence in 1961. My understanding is that for at least 9 years, the government was seen to be something that was well thought of in the African context. But with the advent of Justice Stevens in the early 70s, everything fell apart, as you described, so rapidly. The institutions of government, be they Parliament or the judiciary, disintegrated almost overnight. Are you able to say to me, are you able to tell me why it is that things just fell apart so rapidly?
I think Sheikh Stephen was more interested in maintaining and entrenching himself to power. So what he did was, rather than strengthening institutions, he strengthened individuals. And then he killed state institutions so that vertical accountability mechanisms will not work. You know, and he also suppressed the media, he suppressed civil society. And then what he did was to kill the middle class. Sheikh Stephen practically empowered businessmen of Middle Eastern origin, mainly Lebanese men. He made them very rich because they were sharing the spoil. He killed the Sierra Leonean middle class. He knew the Lebanese they are not citizens, they can't challenge him to power. So they were rich, they had no stake in power. And the Sierra Leonean middle class was suppressed. And then he had a clique of his people who created a shadow state. So it was a state within a state of the most powerful people. It wasn't about getting people to go to school. It was about how much money they share on every Wednesday executive meeting. So that's why the system collapsed so rapidly. And he used, when I say he used crude brutality, I mean, I'm trying to really emphasize what I mean. When I said he killed people. I mean, anybody who was a dissenting opinion was either chased out of Sierra Leone or coerced to be part of the All People's Congress, which was the ruling government. If not, you will be charged with treason and killed. Even in 1987, when his vice president, 87 to 89, Vice President Mina had started raising his voice about some of the violations, they charged him with treason and they killed him in the eyes of everybody. So he used real brutality to suppress people and kill state institutions. Most of the Sierra Leoneans who are out of Sierra Leone or who are returning fled the country. They went into labor in Liberia, self-exile, because he was a one-party state. His rationale was, oh, we're just coming from independence, we don't need many parties. We need everybody on deck so we can build post-independent countries.
Julian, over on the left there.
Emmanuel, there's quite a lot of goodwill that you'll find in Victoria when you're talking, but when people at a meeting like this or at some other meeting say to you, how can we help? I mean, we're lawyers, we're well educated, we've got books to give away, some of us can travel, some of us can send money. If people say to you, how can we help you and the work that you do and with new generations of lawyers or talking to lawyers of goodwill in your country, what's the practical answer that you can give?
Thank you very much. I've been talking to a couple of lawyers about, one of the things that I was really very interested in is to get an exchange program. Either you get Sierra Leonean lawyers come to the Readers program here, or you get senior lawyers go to Sierra Leone and get a crash 2-3 weeks program and maybe do an advocacy course and see really, let the young Sierra Leonean lawyers see what it means to do advocacy. You know, I've been blogging, I've been quite writing on the Sierra Leonean Lawyers Forum, and I keep telling them, you know, I have been to criminal trials where you have files. You don't have 2 pieces of paper, it's going to trial. I've seen cases where people have to really prepare, and I've seen judges who are really organized, and my colleagues are like, oh. You know, I make a lot of jokes to my colleagues when I come out and I write some of this, and they think, oh, you think the West is best? Some people will say, but I say, look, if we are still quoting English cases of 1600s, if we are still having an offences against the Persons Act of 1861 in Sierra Leone, so why not learn from the British system itself or the Australian system where they have moved on? I mean, it's difficult when you look at England, which we copied from, have moved on. We haven't. I mean, so when we talk about practical realities, one of the things that I'm very interested in is how to get a bench exchange, get our judges come and see what is happening here, get lawyers exchange, training programs, books. I want to see more law books. There's only one law school in Sierra Leone, which is in Freetown, which has old books. I want to get more law books in each district headquarters town. So the mystery of becoming a lawyer be demystified. In Sierra Leone, when you're a lawyer, you almost like worship. You know, because people think lawyers are, it's all over the world, but the manner in which it's done in Sierra Leone. I have been trying to talk to the Bar Association on some of this initiative, and if I get goodwill from here, I will link the Bar Association and be a personal overseer of such programs and ensure that they work hard for Sierra Leoneans. In terms of money, I get very uncomfortable asking for money, but because sometimes you take money from people for something, and if you don't have it yourself to really implement what you want, it becomes a problem for accounting for it. I'm very careful about it. I will always want to have whatever resources I take, particularly people's hard-earned money, to come through me for something, because I know I have an integrity to protect, and I will ensure that things are done in the right manner. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Emmanuel. Thank you.